Hold on, I'm giving you the injection. Breathe, stay with me!
It hurts.
The situation is critical. We need more help. Please, stay back and let us work.
What would you do if the person who saved 57 lives in one night was the exact same person your own hospital threw away 24 hours earlier? Keep that question in your mind. Because by the end of this story, someone is going to have to answer it, live, in front of every camera in the city. 57 stretchers came out of that ravine, and every single one of them was breathing. Torn luggage straps held bones together. Broken umbrella spokes became splints. A hollow plastic pen kept a man's lung from collapsing. And when the cameras finally found the person who had done all of it, they did not find a doctor in a clean white coat. They found a nurse in the mud, fired the day before, with her name still listed as terminated on the same hospital system that was, at that very moment, taking credit for her work. This is the story of Nurse Elena Cruz, the hospital that threw her away, and the one night that made it impossible for anyone to forget her name again. If you're just joining us, hit subscribe so you don't miss where this story goes, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I would love to say hello to you personally. Now let's go back to where it all started 12 hours before that ambulance ever left the station. The alarm on Elena Cruz's phone goes off at 5:10 in the morning, the same as it has for 12 years, and she is dressed and out the door before the coffee maker finishes its cycle. Cedar Falls is still dark when she parks behind Riverside General, and the building's lit windows look, as they always do, like a ship that never stops moving. She likes the early shift. Fewer people, fewer meetings, more time to actually sit with a patient instead of rushing through a chart. Grace Okafor is already at the nurse's station when Elena clocks in, sipping tea out of a chipped mug that says "World's Okayest Cook," a gift from her teenage son. "You look like you slept even less than me," Grace says. "I slept fine," Elena says. "I just don't remember doing it." They fall into the easy rhythm of two people who have covered for each other through a decade of double shifts, restocking supply carts and checking overnight vitals side by side before the first wave of daytime patients arrives. An elderly patient named Mr. Delgado, recovering from a minor procedure, asks Elena for the same joke she has told him every morning for a week, and she delivers it exactly the same way, because some routines are worth keeping simply for the small comfort they offer to someone else. "You're going to run out of new jokes eventually," Grace says, smiling, as they move past his room. "He's not laughing at the joke," Elena says. "He's laughing because somebody remembered to ask." There is a reason Elena moves the way she moves in an emergency, a reason that has nothing to do with training manuals. When she was 9 years old, her own mother collapsed in their kitchen while waiting for an ambulance that took 11 minutes to arrive. 11 minutes Elena spent holding her mother's hand and being told by a dispatcher over the phone exactly what to do until help came. Her mother survived that morning. Elena has spent every year since trying to be the voice on the other end of that call for somebody else. The morning moves the way most mornings move at Riverside General, a slow build of minor complaints and routine checkups, until 6:52, when the front doors burst open and a woman is screaming for help with a limp 7-year-old boy in her arms. Noah Whitfield's lips are turning a shade of blue no child's lips should ever turn. His mother, Sandra, is talking so fast the words blur together, something about a cafeteria muffin, something about peanut oil, something about how fine he was 20 minutes ago. Elena is moving before her brain finishes processing the word allergic. She scoops Noah onto a gurney, checks his airway, and calls for an epinephrine injector in a voice loud enough to carry down the hall. "He needs it now," she tells the intern who hesitates at the supply cart. "Not in 5 minutes. Now." The intern reminds her, apologetically, that policy requires physician sign-off for controlled medication, and that the attending assigned to the floor is currently upstairs in a budget meeting that nobody is allowed to interrupt. Elena looks at Noah's face. She looks at the clock. She does the math the way she has done it 100 times before, and the math never changes. A boy in anaphylactic shock does not have 45 minutes to wait on a signature. "He doesn't have 45 minutes, she says, already snapping the safety cap off the injector herself. The medication works in under a minute. Noah's chest rises properly again. Color climbs back into his face like a sunrise nobody was sure would come. Sandra Whitfield cries into Elena's shoulder and thanks her 4 separate times before a single doctor even reaches the room. What Elena does not see, sitting in the waiting area outside Hale's office, is the meeting he walked out of 20 minutes earlier. The hospital board has just finished reviewing 3 malpractice settlements from the previous fiscal year, and the chairman made it plain, in front of the entire room, that one more publicized incident involving an unauthorized procedure would put Hale's own contract on the table at the next renewal. Hale did not defend himself in that meeting. He simply nodded and made a note, and the note had Elena's name on it before he even reached his office. 2 hours later, Elena is sitting across from Dr. Marcus Hale in an office that still smells like new carpet and fresh paint, the kind of office built to impress board members rather than comfort anyone who actually works in the building. A single sheet of paper sits on the desk between them. Hale slides it toward her without lifting his eyes from it. "You administered a controlled medication without physician authorization," Hale says. "Do you understand what that exposes this hospital to?" "I understand a little boy is alive," Elena answers. "That is not the metric I am responsible for," Hale says, finally looking up. "I am responsible for this hospital's liability, its accreditation, and its relationship with every insurance carrier that keeps its lights on. You made a decision that was not yours to make." "Somebody had to make it," Elena says. "Nobody else was in the room." Grace Okafor stands in the doorway, arms crossed, having heard enough of the conversation through the wall to know exactly where it is heading. "Marcus, she saved that child's life," Grace says, stepping inside without waiting to be invited. "You know that. Everyone in this building knows that." "I know that outcomes do not protect us in a lawsuit," Hale replies, not unkindly, which somehow makes it worse. "Protocol does. Nurse Cruz, your badge, please." Elena does not move right away. She looks past Hale, out the office window toward the parking lot below, where Sandra Whitfield's car is still parked near the emergency entrance, its hazard lights blinking against the gray morning. "Do you know what that boy's mother said to me before I even finished the injection?" Elena asks. "She said, 'Please.' Just that. One word, over and over. I've heard that word more times in 12 years than I can count, and I have never once been able to make myself wait for someone else's signature when I hear it." "That instinct is admirable in a person," Hale says. "It is a liability for an employee." "Then maybe your hospital is measuring the wrong thing," Elena says. Elena unclips the plastic card from her scrubs. For a moment her fingers do not want to let go of it, as though her hand understands something her mind is still catching up to. 12 years of double shifts, holiday coverage, and a whole identity built inside these walls. And it ends in under 4 minutes, in a room that still smells like it was furnished last week. "For what it's worth," Elena says at the door, "I'd do it again." "I don't doubt that for a second," Hale answers. "That's exactly the problem." Word moves through a hospital faster than any announcement ever could. By the time Elena reaches the staff locker room to collect her things, 3 of her co-workers already know, and none of them quite know what to say to her. A young nurse named Priya, barely 2 years into the job, hovers near the door working up the courage to speak. "Is it true?" Priya asks. "He actually fired you? For saving that little boy?" "It's true," Elena says, folding her spare scrub top into her bag. "That's not fair," Priya says. "That's not even close to fair." "Fair isn't really the department Hale works in," Elena says, and manages something close to a smile so the younger nurse does not feel worse than she already does. Down the hall, Sandra Whitfield sits beside Noah's bed waiting for discharge paperwork, still shaken from how close the morning came to going a different way. When she overhears a passing tech mention that the nurse who treated her son has just been let go, she stops the tech in the hallway. "Let go? For what?" Sandra asks. "For not waiting on a doctor's signature," the tech says quietly, glancing in both directions before answering. Sandra says nothing more, but she pulls out her phone and types a message to her mother-in-law, a woman who happens to hold the office of mayor of Cedar Falls, a message that will not matter for another 2 days, but will matter enormously once it does. Outside, the sky over Cedar Falls has turned the color of wet concrete. Elena walks through the parking lot with an empty badge clip and a heavier chest than she has carried in years, replaying the last 12 of them like a highlight reel nobody asked to see. She sits in her car for 11 minutes without starting the engine. She thinks about calling her sister and decides against it. She thinks about calling Jason and decides against that too, and then drives towards Cedar Diner anyway, because some habits do not care what a person decides. Cedar Diner sits 3 miles past Riverside General, at the base of the hill that overlooks Miller's Pass Bridge, an old rail crossing built decades before anyone worried about how much rain the hillside above it could hold. Elena orders a coffee she cannot really afford and stares out the window at a sky that keeps darkening by the minute. The bell over the door rings a little after noon. Jason Reyes walks in shaking rainwater off his paramedic jacket, and for a second neither of them says anything, because 2 years of silence does not undo itself in one sentence. "Heard what happened," Jason says, sliding into the booth across from her without asking permission. Grace called me. Word travels fast for a guy who stopped calling me first, Elena says, and there is no real anger in it. Just the tired kind of honesty two people can only manage after enough time has passed. I didn't stop because I wanted to, Jason says quietly. You were working 80-hour weeks trying to save every patient Hale wanted to write off as a lost cause. I was tired of being the guy waiting at home. That's on me as much as it's on you. So we're doing this now, Elena says, half a smile pulling at her mouth despite everything. On the worst day of my career. Seemed like a good time to say it out loud, Jason says, before it turns into another 2 years of neither of us saying anything. Elena wraps both hands around her coffee cup and looks at him properly for the first time since he sat down. There is a version of this conversation where she tells him everything, about the muffin and the injector and the sound of Hale's voice asking her for the badge, but instead she just breathes out slowly and lets herself feel, for one quiet minute, like she is allowed to stop being strong. I lost my badge today, she finally says. 12 years, and it took him 4 minutes. Then he's a fool, Jason says simply. And foolish men usually find out they're foolish the hard way. Neither of them knows yet how right that sentence is about to become. They stay another hour, and somewhere in that hour the conversation turns backward instead of forward. Jason asks about the apartment she used to keep near the hospital. Elena asks about the fishing trips he always promised himself and never took. They talk about the year they moved in together, and the year after that, when Elena picked up every extra shift Hale's predecessor offered because saying no had never come naturally to her. I used to fall asleep waiting for you to get home, Jason says. Not angry. Just tired of doing it alone. I didn't know how to be anything but the person this job needed, Elena admits. I'm not sure I've figured that out even now. Maybe today's a start, Jason says. Whether you wanted it to be or not. Elena remembers, without meaning to, the night they first met, 6 years ago. Both of them working a highway pile-up in weather almost exactly like tonight's. Jason had handed her a spare pair of gloves when hers tore halfway through a triage, and neither of them had said more than a few words to each other for the rest of that shift. It was 3 weeks before he worked up the nerve to ask for her number, and even then he had done it so awkwardly, holding a clipboard in one hand and a cold cup of coffee in the other, that she had laughed before she said yes. You still have those gloves, by the way, Elena says now, smiling into her coffee. I have better ones now, Jason says. Though I'll admit, none of them worked quite as well as an excuse to talk to you. They sit with that memory for a while, comfortable in a way neither of them expected to feel again so easily. Outside, thunder rolls low across the valley, distant enough that neither of them thinks much of it, though the storm above Miller's Pass is no longer being patient. It has already found what it was looking for in the softened ground beneath the old rail line, and it is only a matter of time now before the hillside gives up the last of its grip. Elena laughs, a real laugh, the first one all day, and for a moment the empty badge clip on her scrubs does not feel like the only thing that defines her. Later, while Jason settles the check at the counter, Elena finally calls her sister, Marisol, who picks up on the second ring already sounding worried, because Elena almost never calls in the middle of a shift. I got fired today, Elena says, before Marisol can even finish saying hello. For what? You're the best nurse in that entire building, Marisol says, outrage arriving instantly and without question, the way it only does from family. For being the best nurse in the building, apparently, Elena says. Turns out that's not what they wanted. Their loss, Marisol says. Come stay with me this weekend. I'll make the soup Mom used to make. I might take you up on that, Elena says, and means it, even though neither of them yet knows how much the next 24 hours are about to rearrange those plans. Rain begins tapping harder against the diner window sometime after 1 o'clock, building from a drizzle into a steady, insistent drumming that rattles the old gutters outside. On the muddy hillside above Miller's Pass, water is already finding its way beneath the aging rail line, softening the ground one drop at a time, patient in the way only weather can afford to be. Inside the diner, Elena and Jason talk about nothing important for almost an hour, the kind of nothing that matters more than most somethings, two people relearning the shape of each other's voices. Neither of them checks the time. Neither of them has any reason to believe that somewhere above the valley, a clock has already started running out. At 7:40 that evening, the commuter express pulls out of Cedar Falls Station carrying 63 passengers home through the storm. Derek Alvarez sits near the rear of the third car, texting his sister Rosa about picking up dinner. 2 rows ahead, a retired firefighter named Tommy Bricks reads a paperback he has read 4 times before, comforted by knowing exactly how it ends. Across the aisle, a mother named Priscilla hums quietly to a sleeping toddler while checking her phone for the weather, hoping the rain will ease before her stop. An older couple near the front debate, in the easy way of people who have argued the same argument for 40 years, whether to reheat leftovers or order takeout once they finally get home. "Storm's getting worse," the conductor announces over the intercom, his voice crackling with static. "We're going to slow down a bit crossing Miller's Pass, folks, just to be safe." Derek glances up at the announcement, feels the train ease its speed, and goes back to his phone without a second thought. Slowing down for a storm is the most ordinary sentence a person can hear on a commuter train. Nobody on board has any reason to think it is the last ordinary sentence most of them will hear that night. Nobody on that train notices the small shift in the track bed as the cars cross onto the trestle above Miller's Pass. Nobody feels the ground beneath the rail losing its last inch of grip. At 8:47 p.m., the track gives way. Metal shrieks against metal. 5 cars leave the rail and go down into the ravine below, and the sound that reaches Cedar Diner 3 miles away is less like a train and more like the sky itself tearing open. The lights in the diner flicker and die. Every phone in the building buzzes with an emergency alert in the same instant, the screen glowing with 2 words that empty the room of conversation: train derailment. "That's the bridge," Jason says, already on his feet, radio in hand before his jacket is even zipped. Access roads washed out, the diner cook calls after them, pointing at the muddy hillside road showing on the television mounted behind the counter. Nothing official is getting up there for an hour, maybe more. Elena is already moving toward the door. She grabs the diner's small first aid kit off the wall without asking anyone's permission, because permission is not something the next hour is going to have time for. "You don't have to come," Jason says, though he already knows the answer. "I don't have a badge anymore," Elena says. "I still have hands." They run out into rain that stings on contact, toward a hillside road half swallowed by mud. At the top of the ravine, a handful of other bystanders have already gathered, flashlights shaking in nervous hands, unsure whether it is safe or even possible to climb down into the dark below. "Nobody official's going to make it up this road for a while," one man shouts over the rain, pointing his phone light at the washed-out gravel. "We should wait for the fire department." "There are people down there right now who don't have time to wait," Elena calls back, already testing her footing on the muddy slope. "Anyone who can climb, follow me. Anyone who can't, keep those lights pointed down here so we can see." Something in her voice, steady and certain in a way none of the frightened bystanders can manage themselves, gets 3 more people moving down the hillside behind her, while somewhere below them in the dark, dozens of people are learning exactly how long an hour can feel when help is not coming fast enough. At Riverside General, the emergency alert reaches Grace Okafor while she is finishing paperwork from the day shift she was not even scheduled to cover. Within minutes she has the trauma bay clearing extra beds, calling in off-duty staff, and briefing Dr. Hale, who arrives from home still buttoning his shirt, more concerned with organizing a response the cameras will eventually see than with the chaos currently unfolding 3 miles up the valley. "How many casualties are we expecting?" Hale asks, already thinking 2 steps ahead towards staffing ratios and liability exposure. "We don't know yet," Grace says. "The access road is out. Nobody officially has reached the site." "Then get every available surgeon on standby," Hale says. "If this becomes the story I think it's going to become, I want this hospital ready for every camera that shows up with it." Grace says nothing to that, though the look she gives him says everything she is choosing not to. She turns back to the trauma bay, already thinking less about cameras and more about the sheer number of beds she is about to need. The ravine below Miller's Pass looks like something out of a war photograph. Train cars lie folded against each other, sparks hissing where torn wires touch wet steel, and voices are calling out from openings in the wreckage that, by any reasonable measure, should not have survivors behind them, but do. Jason works his radio at the top of the slope, trying to raise dispatch through a signal the storm keeps swallowing whole. Elena slides down the last stretch of mud on her heels and lands beside a man pinned beneath a fallen luggage rack, his breathing shallow and wrong in a way that only 12 years of listening to broken lungs can recognize instantly. It is Derek Alvarez, and one side of his chest is not rising with the other. "Stay with me," Elena says, pressing her ear briefly to his ribs and hearing exactly what she was afraid of, the telltale silence of a lung collapsing under trapped air. "I need you to breathe when I tell you to, okay?" "I can't get enough air," Derek gasps. There is no ambulance close enough to fix this in time, and Elena knows it. She snaps a pen from her scrub's pocket in half with her teeth, working the plastic casing free with fingers slick from rain. "That's a pen," Derek manages, eyes wide with a fear that has nothing to do with pain and everything to do with logic. "It's the only sterile tube I've got out here," Elena says. "Trust me. You are not dying tonight." She drives the hollow plastic casing into the space between his ribs with a steadiness that owes nothing to luck and everything to a decade of practice. Trapped air hisses free. Derek's chest rises evenly for the first time in minutes, and color starts crawling back into his face. Jason reaches her side seconds later, soaked through and breathless from the climb down, and looks at what she has just done with something caught halfway between disbelief and pride. "You're not even supposed to be doing this anymore," he says. "Tell that to his lungs," Elena answers, already turning toward the next voice calling out from the wreckage. Near the wreckage of the fifth car, Jason pulls free a man named Gerald who had been trapped beneath a folded luggage rack for nearly 20 minutes, conscious the entire time and convinced no one was coming. "I heard voices for a while there," Gerald says, his own voice hoarse from shouting. "Then I heard nothing, and I figured that was it for me." "You're not the first person tonight to figure wrong," Jason tells him, checking his pupils with a penlight. "You're going to be fine." A retired firefighter named Tommy Bricks appears out of the dark a moment later, blood running from a cut above his eyebrow, but his hands are steady and his instincts have not gone anywhere in retirement. "I know first aid," Tommy says. "Tell me where you need me." "Follow me," Elena says. "We're building a triage point on that concrete platform. Everyone who can walk helps carry someone who can't." Together, the three of them turn a ruined loading dock into the only functioning emergency room for miles. Jason keeps the radio alive and drags survivors clear of twisted metal. Tommy holds pressure on wounds and carries children up the slope 2 at a time. Elena moves from patient to patient with whatever the storm has left her. Shoelaces become tourniquets, broken umbrella ribs become splints, small bottles of hand sanitizer become disinfectant. "Is my mom okay?" A small voice asks somewhere near Elena's knee. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, soaked and shivering, has wandered away from a triage blanket. "Your mom is being taken care of right now," Elena tells her gently, wrapping the girl in a dry jacket someone left behind. "I need you to be brave and sit right here for me, okay? Can you do that?" "Okay," the girl whispers, and stays exactly where Elena puts her, which is its own small miracle in the middle of so much chaos. Near the second car, the elderly man who had been arguing gently with his wife about dinner is found conscious but disoriented, a gash along his scalp bleeding steadily into his collar. His wife will not let go of his hand, and Elena does not ask her to. "Harold, look at me," Elena says, pressing a folded strip of cloth against the wound. "Can you tell me your wife's name?" 51 years, Harold mumbles. "Her name is 51 years. "Close enough," his wife says, half laughing, half crying, squeezing his hand tighter. "It's Eleanor, you old fool. Stay with me." A few yards further, a teenager named Marcus sits frozen beside his overturned seat, unhurt but unable to move, his mind locked somewhere between shock and disbelief. Elena crouches to his eye level rather than looming over him. "You're safe," Elena tells him. "I need your help, actually. Can you hold this light steady for me while I work? I need somebody I can count on." Something about being needed rather than simply rescued unlocks him. Marcus takes the flashlight with both hands and holds it steadier than most adults manage, and for the rest of the night he does not leave Elena's side, passing supplies, holding pressure, quietly becoming the kind of help nobody expected a frightened 16-year-old to become. Near the fourth car, Elena finds Priscilla, the mother from earlier in the evening, pinned at an odd angle with her toddler crying but unhurt a few feet away. Priscilla's leg is broken badly enough that moving her wrong could do more damage than the accident already has. "My daughter," Priscilla says through gritted teeth. "Please, just get her out first." "We're getting both of you out," Elena says, already splinting the leg with a broken seat divider and a torn curtain. "Nobody gets left. Hold on to that." Closer to the rear of the train, Elena finds a young off-duty nurse named Beatrice trapped under a seat cushion, more frightened than injured, muttering half-remembered first aid steps to herself as though rehearsing might somehow speed up her own rescue. "You're one of us," Elena says, recognizing the scrubs peeking out from under a torn jacket. "What hospital?" "St. Agnes, across the county line," Beatrice says, wincing as Elena checks her ankle for fractures. "I've never been a patient before. I don't know how you all do this every day." "You get used to needing to be useful," Elena says. "The second you're steady, I need you helping me instead of lying here worrying about it." 10 minutes later, ankle wrapped and steadied by a cane fashioned from a broken window frame, Beatriz is doing exactly that, moving from patient to patient with the same instinct that got her into nursing in the first place. 2 hours in, exhaustion finally catches up to her all at once, the way it always does, arriving late and heavy rather than gradually. Her hands are shaking from the cold and overuse. For one long moment, crouched beside a stranger whose name she has not even had time to learn, Elena feels the entire weight of the last 2 days collapse onto her shoulders at once, the firing, the rain, the ache in her own bleeding palms. "Are you still with us?" Tommy Bricks asks, noticing her stillness. "Just resetting," Elena says, and shakes the feeling off the only way she knows how, by finding the next person who needs her more than she needs to rest. She thinks, for just a second, about Hale's office and the badge she left on his desk, and it occurs to her that she has spent an entire career worrying about permission she never actually needed. Nobody down here in the mud has asked to see her license. Nobody has asked whether a committee approved her methods. They have only asked her to stay, and she has said yes every single time, because that is the only qualification that has ever really mattered to the people in front of her. The thought steadies her more than any amount of rest could. She wipes the rain from her eyes and keeps moving. For the next several hours, in freezing rain, Elena keeps working without stopping to feel her own exhaustion, without stopping to feel the small cuts opening across her palms, without stopping at all. By the time headlamps finally appear at the top of the ravine, 57 people are stabilized on that platform, breathing, bandaged, and alive. Somewhere past midnight, in the brief lull between patients, Jason finds a moment to press a dry blanket around Elena's shoulders, his hand lingering there a second longer than the task requires. "You should sit for 1 minute," Jason says. "Just one." "If I sit down, I'm not sure I'll get back up," Elena says, but she leans into him anyway, just for a breath, before pushing off the wall and returning to work. "They're going to want to know who did all this," Jason says quietly, watching the first rescue crew rappel down the slope. "Then let them ask the patients," Elena says. "I'm not interested in taking a bow." She is soaked through, bleeding from small cuts on her palms, and completely unwilling to be photographed. When the first official rescue crew reaches the platform, she is already climbing back up the muddy slope into the dark, disappearing before anyone thinks to ask her name. Jason drives Elena home just before dawn, both of them soaked through and too exhausted to speak for most of the ride. At her door, he lingers a moment longer than a simple goodbye requires, and neither of them pretends not to notice. "Get some sleep," Jason says softly, brushing a strand of dried mud from her cheek with a gentleness that has nothing to do with medicine. "You earned it more than anyone I've ever met." "Stay," Elena says quietly, "just until the sun comes up. I don't want to be alone with everything that just happened." He does not need to be asked twice. Inside, she peels off her ruined scrubs and wraps herself in the first dry sweater she finds, and for a while neither of them says much of anything at all, content simply to sit close together on the small couch, her head resting against his shoulder, his arms settled around her like it had never once left. When she finally falls asleep, it is the first real rest she has had in 2 days, and Jason stays exactly where he is rather than risk waking her by moving. At Riverside General, Dr. Marcus Hale has spent the night preparing for disaster the way he prepares for everything, with a press strategy instead of a plan. Camera crews are already set up in the lobby when the first ambulances arrive, ready to capture the hospital's heroic response to a tragedy. What arrives instead confuses him. Every patient rolling through the doors is already splintered, already bandaged, already breathing evenly. There is no chaos for the cameras to capture, because the chaos has already been solved somewhere else, by someone else, in the mud. "Who did this?" Hale asks a paramedic, gesturing at a perfectly tied tourniquet made from a shoelace. "Nobody official," the paramedic answers, still catching his breath. "Some woman was down there running the whole triage before we even got the road cleared. Never got her name." In the trauma bay, head nurse Grace Okafor examines Derek Alvarez's improvised chest tube and goes very still. The tight, looped knot securing the plastic tube in place is one she recognizes instantly, because she taught that exact knot to a nursing student 11 years ago, back when that student was still learning how to hold a suture kit steady. "Who saved you out there?" Grace asks Derek gently, checking his vitals with hands that are not quite as calm as her voice. "A woman named Sarah No, Elena," Derek corrects himself, still shaking from cold and shock. "She told me I wasn't dying tonight. I believed her, because she sounded like she'd already decided it for both of us." Grace's hands still go over the bandage. She does not say Elena's name out loud, not yet, but the realization settles into her like a stone dropped in still water, sending ripples she cannot stop. Down the hall, Rosa Alvarez, Derek's younger sister and a records clerk at Riverside General, pulls up the hospital's staffing database on a break room computer, curious whether the mystery rescuer clocked in anywhere that night. What she finds instead is a termination record dated the previous morning, timestamped 4 hours before the boy named Noah Whitfield was ever brought through the emergency doors. "Grace, you need to see this," Rosa says, turning the monitor around. "This says Elena Cruz was fired yesterday for saving a kid's life without a doctor's signature." Grace reads the file twice, feeling something cold settle low in her stomach that has nothing to do with the storm outside. Rosa has spent 3 years in hospital records, quietly cataloging the small, unglamorous decisions that keep a building like Riverside General running. She has watched budget memos override staffing requests more times than she can count. She has never once seen a termination processed as quickly as Elena Cruz's, approved and finalized within the same afternoon it was requested, as though someone wanted it filed before anyone had time to reconsider. "Something about the timing bothers me," Rosa says. "This isn't how we usually process these. It's like he wanted it locked in before the end of the day." "Because he did," Grace says. "Marcus doesn't like loose ends, and last night just handed him the biggest one of his career." Rosa spends the rest of that morning quietly pulling together a folder of her own, timestamps and staffing logs laid out in plain, undeniable order, not because anyone asked her to, but because she has spent 3 years watching decisions get buried under paperwork and has decided this particular decision does not deserve the same fate. She leaves the folder on Grace's desk with a small note that simply reads, "In case anyone asks for proof." "You didn't have to do this," Grace tells her later, flipping through the pages. "Neither did Elena," Rosa says. "It seemed like a fair trade." Dr. Hale overhears enough of the hallway conversation to understand exactly who some woman in the mud really is, and his first instinct is not gratitude. It is damage control. "Nobody says her name to a single reporter," Hale tells the staff gathered near the nurses' station, his voice low and hard. "Not one word, or you will be looking for a new hospital by morning. Is that understood?" Most of the staff look at the floor. Grace does not. "You can order silence, Marcus," Grace says. "You cannot order 57 survivors to forget the only name they kept repeating all night." "Watch me," Hale says, and walks away before she can answer. In a quiet corner of City Hall that same morning, Sandra Whitfield's message from 2 days earlier finally reaches the top of Mayor Diane Whitfield's inbox, sitting alongside a dozen other reports about the derailment. What was once a passing complaint about an unfair firing now sits beside overnight footage of 57 stabilized survivors, and the mayor's assistant, sensing the shape of a story before anyone says it aloud, quietly pulls Elena Cruz's personnel file from Riverside General's public disclosure request. You're going to want to see this before the 9 o'clock statement," the assistant says, setting the folder on the mayor's desk. Mayor Whitfield opens it, reads the timestamp on the termination notice, and reads it again beside the timestamp on the derailment response. A long, quiet breath leaves her, the kind that comes from a person realizing exactly how close the story almost got told wrong. "Clear my morning," the mayor says. "I'm going to that press conference myself." Back at Riverside General, Priya, the young nurse from Elena's last morning on the job, hears fragments of the same story spreading through the break room, whispering between coffee refills and hurried glances toward Hale's office door. "They're saying it was her," Priya tells another tech under her breath. "The nurse he fired. They're saying she saved all those people last night with nothing but a first aid kit. If that gets out before Hale controls it," the tech mutters, "he's finished." "Maybe he should be," Priya says, surprising herself with how easily the words come out. By mid-morning, the whispered conversation has spread far enough that a small cluster of nurses and technicians gather near the supply closet, debating in low voices what, if anything, they are willing to risk saying out loud. "He'll fire anyone who talks to a reporter," one tech says. "You heard him." "He can't fire all of us," Priya says. "Not if we all say the same thing at once." "Easy to say. Harder to be the first one," the tech mutters. "Then I'll be the first one," Priya says, surprising herself twice in the same morning. "She didn't hesitate for us. I'm not going to hesitate for her." By morning, news vans line the entire block outside Riverside General, satellite masts rising above the parking lot like a second, temporary skyline. In a private room behind the lobby, Hale rehearses his statement one final time in front of a mirror, adjusting his tie, practicing the exact tone of humility that tests well with focus groups but has never once come from anywhere real inside him. "This hospital's training kept 57 people alive," he says under his breath, testing the sentence twice. Good. Confidence. Believable. For just a moment, alone in the mirror, something flickers across Hale's face that looks almost like doubt. He remembers, briefly, the young resident he used to be. The one who chose medicine because his own grandmother once waited too long in a hospital hallway that did not have enough staff to reach her in time. He wonders when exactly that resident became a man who measures a saved life in terms of liability exposure. The moment passes quickly. He straightens his tie and reminds himself that hospitals do not run on good intentions. They run on funding, and funding requires a story the board can be proud of. A junior press aide knocks and tells him the mayor has arrived early and would like a private word before they step outside together. Hale straightens his jacket, unconcerned, assuming she wants to discuss timing rather than the folder already sitting on her lap. Outside, the growing crowd of reporters trades rumors while they wait, half-formed versions of the story already circulating on phones and laptops, none of them quite accurate, all of them edging closer to the truth than Hale would like. A local blogger who covers City Hall for a small independent outlet has already published a short post titled simply, "Who is the mystery nurse?" And by the time Hale steps toward the podium, that single question has been shared more times than his hospital's entire quarterly newsletter. Mayor Whitfield is waiting in the small conference room behind the lobby, the termination folder closed on the table in front of her, her hands folded on top of it. "Marcus," she says, without any of the warmth their past working relationship might normally carry. "Before we go out there, I want to give you a chance to tell me the truth privately." "I'm not sure what you mean," Hale says, though something in his posture has already changed. "A nurse named Elena Cruz," the mayor says. "Fired yesterday morning. The same nurse and several dozen survivors are described as the person who kept them alive last night. My own grandson is one of the patients she saved the day before that. I would like to hear your version before I hear the version the cameras get." Hale is quiet for a long moment, turning a pen over in his fingers, and for the first time all morning he looks less like a director and more like a man doing arithmetic he does not like the answer to. "She violated policy," Hale finally says. "I made the decision the board expected me to make. And last night, the board's decision nearly cost this city its faith in that hospital entirely," the mayor says, standing. "I suggest you consider very carefully what you say out there, Marcus." "I already know what I'm going to say." At the podium outside Riverside General, Dr. Hale stands beside the mayor, microphones crowding the space in front of him like a small, hungry forest. "Last night, this hospital's systems, training, and protocols kept 57 people alive," Hale tells the cameras, his voice smooth and rehearsed. "This is what world-class emergency preparedness looks like, and Riverside General is proud to have delivered it." A reporter near the front raises her hand. "Sir, several survivors are describing a lone rescuer at the scene before any official response arrives. Some are calling her a hero. Can you confirm who that was?" "That was a coordinated effort guided by this hospital's emergency framework," Hale answers smoothly. "Not the isolated work of any single rogue individual acting outside protocol." Another reporter follows up before Hale can move on. "Multiple patients say the same name. Do you have any comments on reports that a recently terminated employee may have been involved?" "I'm not aware of any such reports," Hale says, a little too quickly, a little too evenly, the practice calm starting to show it seems. A third reporter, sensing blood in the water, presses further. "Sir, can you at least confirm whether any Riverside General staff member was terminated this week?" "Personnel matters are confidential," Hale says, tugging at his collar just slightly. "I won't be discussing individual staffing decisions at a public briefing." A fourth reporter, standing near the barricade, calls out the question that finally forces the mayor's hand. "Mayor Whitfield, does the city have any comment on the hospital's account so far?" "I do, actually," the mayor says, stepping toward the microphones for the first time, her voice calm but carrying an edge that immediately changes the energy of the entire plaza. "But I think it's only fair to let the people who were actually there speak first." Mayor Whitfield's expression does not change, but her grip on the folder in her hands tightens slightly. Somewhere behind the podium, Grace Okafor stands with Derek Alvarez, Tommy Bricks, and 3 other survivors, all of them watching Hale build a story that none of them recognize. "He's about to lie to the whole city," Derek mutters to Grace. "Live, on camera, about the person who saved my life." "Then we're not going to let him finish," Grace says quietly, and starts wheeling Derek's chair toward the front. The plaza doors open before Hale can finish his next sentence. Derek Alvarez rolls forward in a wheelchair, a hollow plastic tube still taped carefully to his chest, flanked by Tommy Bricks, 2 other survivors from the ravine, and head nurse Grace Okafor. "He's lying," Derek says loudly enough for every microphone to catch. "The woman who saved my life wasn't wearing a hospital badge. She didn't have one. This hospital took it from her the morning before." Gasps ripple through the reporters. Cameras swing toward Hale, whose composed expression cracks for the first time all morning. "That is a mischaracterization," Hale starts, but Tommy Bricks cuts him off, his firefighter's voice trained to carry over worse noise than a press conference. "I was there," Tommy says. "I watched a woman with no equipment and no backup keep 57 strangers alive for over an hour before your ambulances ever got up that hill." Priscilla, the young mother Elena splintered in the wreckage, steps forward from the small crowd of survivors, her leg still in a cast, her daughter balanced on her hip. "She wrapped my leg with a curtain and a piece of a broken seat," Priscilla says, voice shaking but clear. "She never once told me her name would matter to anybody. She just kept saying nobody gets left." A murmur moves through the crowd of reporters and bystanders, phones lifting to capture every second. The story shifting visibly in real time from a hospital's press release into something the whole city will be talking about by dinner. Near the back, Sandra Whitfield stands with Noah's small hand in hers, watching a woman she has never properly thanked get the recognition she has quietly hoped for since the moment she overheard a tech mention the firing in the hallway. "That's her," Noah whispers, pointing at a photo one of the reporters is holding up on a tablet, a still frame pulled from a survivor's phone video taken in the ravine. "That's the nurse who gave me my shot." "Yes, baby," Sandra says, crouching beside him. "That's exactly who she is." Grace steps to the podium and holds up a small plastic ID card, still faintly stained with mud and dried blood. "This belongs to Elena Cruz," Grace says, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Dr. Hale fired her yesterday morning for saving a child's life without waiting 45 minutes for paperwork. Last night, using nothing but instinct and whatever the storm left her, that same nurse personally stabilized 57 people before a single ambulance reached them." Mayor Whitfield steps forward, opening the folder in her hands for the whole city to see. "The child Nurse Cruz saved yesterday morning," the mayor says, "was my grandson, Noah. I have spent this entire morning reading about a hospital more concerned with protecting its liability than its patients. Dr. Hale, if your protocol saved those 57 people last night, then why is the nurse you ruined the only name every single survivor keeps repeating?" Hale opens his mouth to answer and finds, for the first time in his career, that there is no version of the truth that saves him. The cameras catch every second of his silence, the polished composure he arrived with completely gone, replaced by the look of a man watching his own carefully built story collapse in real time in front of the only audience that ever mattered to him. "I was protecting this hospital," Hale finally says, quieter now, almost to himself. "You were protecting yourself," Grace says. "There's a difference, Marcus, and everyone standing here just watched you fail to see it." Effective this hour, Mayor Whitfield tells the reporters, Dr. Marcus Hale is removed as Medical Director of Riverside General, pending a full review of this hospital's leadership. This city does not reward people who steal credit for other people's courage. Security escorts Hale back inside as the crowd continues to murmur, and Grace catches up to him briefly at the staff entrance, not out of cruelty, but because 12 years of working under the same roof as someone earns at least one honest final word. "You could have just told the truth this morning," Grace says. "None of this had to end this way." "I know," Hale says, and for once there is no Polish left in his voice at all. "I convinced myself the truth was bad for the hospital. I never once asked whether it was bad for her." Grace does not offer him forgiveness, because it is not hers to give, but she does not walk away either. Some endings deserve a witness, even the endings people bring on themselves. Behind her, the survivors who gathered on the plaza begin drifting toward each other in small clusters, strangers the night before, bound now by something no press release could ever manufacture. Derek shakes Tommy's hand. Priscilla thanks Beatrice for holding her daughter steady in the dark. None of them need a camera to know what happened between them in that ravine, and all of them, in their own way, understand that the story the city will remember was written in the mud, long before anyone stood at a podium to claim it. Across town, in a small apartment with rain still tapping gently on the window, Elena sits with her bandaged hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the entire moment unfold on a muted television. Jason sits beside her, close enough that their shoulders touch, close enough that neither one moves away. "You could have told them who you were," Jason says softly. "Out there in the mud. You could have made sure they knew." "I wasn't out there for credit," Elena says. "I was out there because people needed someone who wouldn't wait for permission to help them." That's exactly why the whole city is talking about you this morning, Jason says, nodding toward the screen. Her phone rings before she can answer him. It is the director of trauma services at Lakeview University Medical Center, offering her the role of chief trauma nurse, full authority, no committee required to sign off on saving a life. I'd be honored, Elena says into the phone. And for the first time in 2 days, she smiles all the way to her eyes. Jason reaches over and laces his fingers through hers, careful of the small cut still healing across her palms. So, he says, does the new job come with a badge that actually means something? It comes with a badge that trusts the person wearing it, Elena says. That's all I ever wanted. Outside the window, the rain over Cedar Falls finally begins to clear. 3 weeks later, Elena walks into her first shift at Lakeview University Medical Center wearing a new badge with her own name printed clearly across it. Grace calls her that same afternoon to say Riverside General has quietly reinstated its old override policy for genuine emergencies, the very policy that cost Elena her job in the first place, and that the hospital's board has offered Grace the interim director position while a permanent search continues. You should take it, Elena tells her over the phone. That hospital needs someone who remembers what the job actually is. Only if you promise to visit and remind me, Grace says, laughing. Somebody has to keep me honest. Derek Alvarez sends Elena a photograph of his healed scar a few weeks later with a message that simply says, "Still breathing because of you." Priscilla mails her a card signed by her daughter in careful, 6-year-old handwriting. Tommy Bricks shows up at Lakeview one afternoon just to shake her hand, off-duty and unannounced, saying only that some debts are worth paying in person. Marcus, the teenager who held the flashlight steady all night in the ravine, later applied to a hospital volunteer program, listing Elena as the reason on his application. Somewhere in that same city, a boy named Noah Whitfield draws a picture at school of a nurse standing in the rain, and takes it proudly to his grandmother's office door, where it stays long after the news cameras have moved on to other stories. A year later, Elena stands in a new trauma bay at Lakeview, training a class of incoming nurses on triage under pressure. She tells them about torn luggage straps and hollow plastic pens, about a night in the rain when the equipment ran out but the will to help did not. One student raises a hand and asks the question Elena has heard a dozen times since that night. Weren't you scared? Doing all that without backup, without even a badge? I was terrified, Elena admits. But being scared and unwilling to help are two different things. Don't ever let anyone convince you they are the same. Another student asks whether she ever regrets losing her job at Riverside General, and Elena considers the question honestly before answering, because it deserves an honest answer rather than a rehearsed one. I don't spend much time on regret, she says. I spend my time on the next patient. That's where the job actually lives, not in the paperwork, and not in anyone's approval. Class ends, and the students file out slowly, a few of them lingering to thank her, one of them asking, almost shyly, if she would consider teaching the seminar again next semester. Elena tells her she would be honored to, and means every word of it, because passing along 12 years of hard-won instinct to someone just starting out feels like its own kind of quiet repayment for the night the rain refused to let her rest. She gathers her notes, glances once more at the empty trauma bay behind her, quiet now in a way it rarely gets to be, and allows herself a small, private moment of pride before switching off the lights. It has been a long road from a badge left on a desk to a classroom full of nurses who will one day carry their own instincts into rooms just as chaotic as the one that changed everything for her, and she would not trade a single mile of that road for an easier one. That same week, Grace calls with news of her own. Riverside General's board has made her interim appointment permanent, and one of her first official acts as medical director is reinstating a mentorship program that pairs new nurses with veteran staff, something Hale had cut years earlier to save on the budget. She names it, without asking anyone's permission, the Cruz Fellowship. You didn't have to do that, Elena says when Grace tells her. I know, Grace says. I wanted to anyway. Some things are worth spending political capital on. After class, Jason meets her in the parking lot the way he has most evenings for the past year, and they walk out together into weather that, for once, is calm and clear. You have a new job with a director who trusts your judgment, Marisol says over the phone that weekend, delighted in the particular way only an older sister can manage. And apparently a paramedic who never really stopped waiting for you either. I'd call that a decent trade for one bad Tuesday. When you put it that way, Elena says, laughing, it almost sounds like it was worth it. It was always going to be worth it, Marisol says. You just needed the rest of the world to catch up to what I've known about you your whole life. What this story leaves behind is simple. Titles do not decide who deserves respect. A badge is just plastic. What matters is who shows up when the paperwork runs out and the storm does not wait. Elena Cruz never needed a hospital's permission to be exactly who she already was. If you have made it this far into her story, thank you for staying with her through the storm. Subscribe to catch the next one, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one, and I would love, more than you know, to say hello.